What can we say about Bosnian Croats and modern national movements? In many publicist texts, particularly Bosniak, it can be read that Croatdom and Serbdom were introduced into Bosnia only in the 19th century by the national and nationalist propaganda from neighbouring Croatia and Serbia. However, we have shown that such assertions are incorrect. It is more likely to state that the neighbouring national movements of Croats and Serbs provided a new momentum and a new secularist tone to the already existing Croatian-Catholic and Serbian Orthodox cultural structures. This process endeavoured to stop the Ottoman reformist politics of the 19th century, as well as the Austro-Hungarian modernizing policies which succeeded the Ottoman and which prohibited the Croatian and Serbian names in Bosnia and introduced Bosniakness as the national appellation for all the inhabitants of Bosnia, but which in the final analysis did not succeed. Until the Austro-Hungarian occupation, the cultural and political leadership of the Bosnian Croats remained in the hands of the Franciscans. Their schooling in Slavonia and Hungary, under Austrian rule, from the end of the 18th century, awoke an interest for national, cultural and political movements amongst individuals. These movements, which sought not only cultural and political emancipation from foreign rule, the Ottoman and Habsburg Empires, but also to politically overcome confessionalism and to construct a modern secular culture, attracted the participation of a considerable part of the Croatian clergy, particularly the lower clergy. It included the Franciscan Illyrians in Bosnia, such as Martin Nedić, Grga Martić, Franjo Jukić, and others. Individual Franciscans, such as Martić and Jukić, attempted to cooperate with the Serbian national movement by publishing their texts in Serbian journals, the editors of which Serbianized their texts. This was, nevertheless, just one episode. In the 1860s, Martić recognized the greater Serbian character of Serbian propaganda in Bosnia and, ahead of the Congress of Berlin in 1878, accepts the Austro-Hungarian and not Serbian and Montenegrin occupation of Bosnia, which some Croatian Yugoslavists and other representatives of the Croatian cultural and political public resented due to their ignorance, more or less, of the real state of affairs in Bosnia, or their own opportunism. Until the Austro-Hungarian occupation of Bosnia, the cultural and political activity of the Bosnian Franciscans unfolded within the framework of Illyrianism and Yugoslavism in the manner of a Croatian federalist and not Serbian unitarist interpretation of these national movements and ideologies.
Naturally, the opening of the Franciscans towards secular political and cultural movements was reflected in their mutual relations, especially in the so-called Berešich affair in the 1830s and 1840s. This affair caused a deep division amongst the Bosnian Franciscans and resulted in the administrative detachment of Herzegovina from Bosna-Srebrena in 1846 and the establishment of a separate apostolic vicariate for Herzegovina. The mutually bitter polemics led the apostolic vicar Rafo Berešich and his supporters, who mainly studied in Italy and were imbued with the contemporary ecclesiastical conservatism, to reproach their opponents, educated in Slavonia and Hungary, for being imbued with an anti-Roman secularist spirit, that they had absorbed revolutionary ideas, and that, with the help of Ludovic Guy, they were intending to raise a rebellion and establish the Illyrian kingdom. With the Austro-Hungarian occupation in 1878, there begins a new period for both Bosnian Franciscans and for the Bosnian Croats as a whole. From a legal perspective, Christians were granted equality with Muslims. But the situation in a cultural and political sense, for all three Bosnian confessions, Muslims, Catholics and Orthodox, became more complex. Namely, the migration of 100,000 qualified workers, technicians, civil servants, and teachers from the Habsburg monarchy to Bosnia did not only bring cultural and technical modernization, but also competition, which led to dissatisfaction, particularly amongst the Bosnian Muslims. With the migration of new muscle from the monarchy, especially after the disbandment of the military frontier in Croatia, in 1881, the Bosnian Croats were numerically strengthened, so that their percentage rose from 18.08% to 22.81% from 1879 to 1910, but there also developed unfavorable competition between the autochthonous and newly settled Croats, particularly after the introduction of an established Catholic ecclesiastical hierarchy in 1881, which decided to gradually displace the Franciscans from the church and public life. This introduced a conflict between the secular clergy and the Franciscans that has not been resolved to the present day.
What can we say about Bosnian Croats and the ideologies of the 20th century? After the Austro-Hungarian occupation in 1878, the cultural and political development of the Bosnian Croats flows in a reinforced communication with the cultural and political processes in Dalmatia, Croatia, and Slavonia, in spite of the efforts of Benjamin von Calais, Austro-Hungarian Minister of Finances in charge for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and his associates, to isolate Bosnia from the national movements of Serbs and Croats. With the growth of Greater Serbianism in the 1880s, and under the influence of Croatian settlers, the Franciscans converted from Yugoslavism to the Greater Croatian ideology, according to which Bosnia is an exclusively Croatian territory. On the other hand, a significant number of Franciscans, nevertheless, showed an interest in political cooperation with other confessional nationalities in Bosnia, and thus retained some openness toward Yugoslavism. At the turn of the 20th century, the Franciscans found political allies in the first generation of Croatian higher education graduates from Bosnia, who completed their education at European universities and returned to their homeland. Together with their compatriots from Dalmatia, Croatia, and Slavonia, they brought liberal understandings on culture and politics from the universities at which they studied. This will introduce a new dynamic in the organization of cultural and political life in Bosnia, and provoke ideological and political divisions amongst the Bosnian Croats. In the first decade of the 20th century, at the time when the modern political life of the Bosnian Croats begins, with the formation of cultural and social organizations and then political parties, the ideological political spectrum included, on one side, the Archbishop of Sarajevo Josip Stadler, and his supporters with a clerical program for the 20th century and an uncompromising Greater Croatdom, and, on the other side, the Croatian liberal secular intelligentsia, more open to political and ideological compromises, and supported by the Franciscans, not because of liberalism, but due to their conflict with Archbishop Stadler. Stadler strove to displace both the Franciscans and liberals from public life, but he was unsuccessful, especially when it was a question of political parties. Croatian nationalist liberals in Bosnia also, following the ideology of Ante Starčević, who extolled Bosnian Muslims as genetically the purest Croats, openly propagated, with great success among newly enlightened Bosnian Muslim Europeanizing intelligentsia, a sort of supraconfessional Croatian unity of Catholics and Muslims, which would make thus defined Croats a stable majority in Bosnia.
On the one side, the Bosnian Croats entered the First World War with this ideological political paradigm, the Starčević-type liberals who considered all Catholics and Muslims to be ethnic Croats. On the second side, Franciscans with a readiness for political compromises, and a soft Greater Croatian conception of Bosnia, and on the third, Stadler and his supporters, with a rigid clericalism and Croatdom. After the military defeat of the Habsburg monarchy, and the resuscitation of political activities in the spring of 1917, Stadler's clericalism and rigid Croatdom in Bosnia caves in. Not only do the liberal intelligentsia and Franciscans in Bosnia, and then in Herzegovina, declare themselves in favor of Yugoslavism, but so too do a part of Stadler's supporters. Archbishop Stadler, as the last Mohican of clerical Greater Croatdom, signs a circular of the Catholic Episcopate from 29 November 1918, which welcomed the establishment of the Yugoslav state, under Serbian aegis, and dies on 8 December 1918.